Hello, listeners and fellow book lovers. Welcome to The Book Snug, a bi-weekly conversational podcast about books and the reading life. My name is Stephany.
And I'm Julia.
We're a mother and a daughter who love reading and talking about books, the ones we adore and the ones we don't. We're delighted you're here, so grab your favorite hot drink or ice-cold beverage and settle in for another cozy, bookish chat.
Welcome to today's episode of the Book Snug podcast. We're starting an exciting series, which we're calling 3 Peas in a Pod. In this series, we're inviting guests onto the show and talking about a book of their choosing. Disclaimer, these episodes will be full of spoilers. For this pilot episode, we've been requested The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell by our fabulous guest. We knew from the beginning that we wanted this guest first. And I'm very pleased to welcome my Nana, Jo Hart, to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Nana. Would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about who you are?
Well, good morning, listeners, and thank you, Julia and Stephany, for inviting me. My name is Jo Hart, and I've been a reader my entire life. I was thinking this morning how I haunted our little tiny elementary school library and later on my high school library looking for another book, a new book to read. And I could spend hours sitting outside the apple tree with a book in the summertime. So it's always been a big part of me, a big part of my life. So I would say even now, reading is not just my hobby, but it's just interwoven into a lot of different things that I do. I do have another life, though. I spent my life my working life as an RN and enjoyed every minute of it, but I'm now retired. I have 3 wonderful children. Stephany is my oldest, and then Kelly Kreider in the middle, and Andrew Hart, who is the baby of the family. And then I have 6 grandchildren who I love dearly, and their husbands and wives, those who have spouses. We love to travel. We do camp. I love the camping component of traveling, and also the exploration part of traveling. And we've lived here in our home for almost 40 years, and Lancaster County for 40 years, so I guess we're a product of that environment. So that is me in a nutshell.
Do you have a highlight of travel, someplace that you absolutely loved and would like to return to?
We loved a road trip we took through Nova Scotia. It took us almost 2.5 weeks. We went up along the New England coast, took the jet ferry over into Nova Scotia, did a loop around Nova Scotia. We didn't go north, which tells me we need another trip. And then we came down through the north of Maine and the rest of New England, New Hampshire. And so that was quite memorable, every bit of it. Even the food. I can remember meals we ate. Probably my second most memorable one was when we took Julia and another granddaughter, Meg, to Yellowstone Park and some of those other areas out in the West. What a fun time. A long time. And there are many memories about that, and they come back to me all the time. So that might be 2, but there are many others.
Well, that Wyoming trip was fabulous on a lot of reasons, but during that trip, you read Walk 2 Moons to us while we were in the car, which is one of my favorite stories growing up. And it was really cool because in that book, they do a road trip. So it was really cool to be sharing that experience as Sal with everybody in the car as you were reading it.
And aren't they traveling
with
west?
grandparents?
Yes.
Grandparents, and they're traveling west or Midwest.
Westish. And that Walk 2 Moons is by Sharon Creech.
Yes. So lots of good memories with travel and reading and everything. For these 3 Peas in a Pod episodes, we are using the call pile for the books that our guests kind of bring to us to kind of talk about that. And I'm going to kind of give more of a description of the call pile as we get more into that. But listeners, I just wanted you to have a heads up of the structure we're using as we talk about these stories so that you can engage in the conversation with us. And I do want to reiterate, these episodes are chock full of spoilers.
Yes.
If this is a book that you want to read, it's on your TBR list, please read it and then come back. We don't want to spoil anything for you if it's something that you're looking to do. So, spoilers. Then we want to talk about tea. So, are you drinking anything, Nana?
I am not, other than some water nearby. I already had enough coffee this morning.
What about you, Mom? Are you drinking anything good?
I am, but I can't remember the name of it. It's a Twinings tea. I think it's orange and spice. I was just feeling kind of fruity this morning, so that's what I'm drinking. What about you, Julia? What do you have in your mug?
This is a tea for my sister-in-law. It's a Good and Gather tea. It's called Calm and Content. It's an herbally kind of tea. The other kind of note that I want to give here, listeners, is we are in a different recording setting. So if things sound more echoey or if you hear some puppy barks, we're in a different setting. So I do just want to put that out there for you right now. Before we kind of dive into this conversation of the marriage portrait, we would like to play 20 questions with you, Nana.
All right. Fire away.
So the first question we have is, when you're reading, what is your main motivation? Entertainment, FOMO, escape, personal growth, etc. Why do you read?
I think probably the main reason would be curiosity. I really am curious about how other people live their lives, how they think, how they solve problems, and other countries, other settings that I'm not familiar from. Because I'm from Lancaster County, I think you can get a tunnel vision about the world. So that would be one. And of course, escape.
Yeah.
You always need sometimes an escape from the mundane and the routine. Sometimes you're not feeling well. You need an escape from that. So I would say that, and always, always fear of missing out. If someone is talking about a book that they just loved and it's on the bestseller list and it's just the word of the day out there, I want to know about it. Now, sometimes that's a disappointment, but at least I can say I tried. I do, when I think about reading, like to think about this quote that a lot of people attribute to C.S. Lewis. And it is, we read to know that we are not alone. And I don't think I need to explain that.
No.
But that is often attributed to C.S. Lewis, but that's not the case. It was a remark made by Anthony Hopkins in Shadowlands in 1993 when he was playing a fictionalized C.S. Lewis. But it lives on.
Yeah.
We read to know we are not alone.
That was such a good movie.
Yeah.
And C.S. Lewis was just such an incredible man.
Yeah.
Okay, Mom, I have a question for you. If you could read only one genre for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Well, literary fiction for sure. I am a fan of fiction, good fiction. So I would have to say that genre. Women's fiction in particular. I really like reading about women in history who have been overlooked, but made huge contributions to where we are at right now in the 21st century. And I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about women who were shadows in the past, but they no longer are because somebody's caring enough to write about them.
Yeah.
So I would say that for sure. But I am lately getting very interested in magical realism. It's so entertaining.
It is. I agree.
So intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah. Magical realism is one of my comfort types of genres. Well, it makes sense then that you picked the marriage portrait for us to read today, because that is historical fiction focusing on a young girl who was kind of just forgotten by history.
Okay, question 3. Is there any genre, series, or author, or even a type of book that you just can't get into?
Horror. I just can't do it. I'm curious about it. I try. But the creepiness of things and the yuckiness of things, sometimes I just can't. Yeah. I can't get through it. Not to say I'm not tantalized by it. My last try was a book called Things in Jars. Now, I should have known by the title, but you know how that goes. So I'm going to say horror. I cannot handle it. I want to add another thing. Too much open door
spicy
stuff, I usually will close the book and just put it away forever, because so often it seems gratuitous. It's not even necessary to the story. So.
Yeah.
No things in jars for me. And that is a book by
Jess Kidd.
Jess Kidd.
Now, did you read her? You read her other book, Himself.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that was,
well,
that had some not horror, but it had some yucky stuff in it. Yeah.
I always wonder, are those people okay that write those books?
Well, there's that too.
What's going on that needs to get figured out?
It feels like she writes books that are a little left of center, but I like those kind of books.
Sure.
I really liked Himself, and I have things in jars that I'm planning on reading this summer, probably at the beach.
Oh.
Maybe that'll be better to read it out in the sunshine.
Right.
In the warm, the sand, the warm sand. Right. No boogie monsters. You can see them coming from miles away. Okay, Mom, my next question is, what is the most important to you? Character development, plot, writing, or the message or themes of the book?
Well, writing always, because I admire the craft. But I have to say character development. And having said that, you'll know again why I chose the marriage portrait as we get into talking about that book. But I just so enjoy seeing inside the mind of somebody. Why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they in this situation? How are they going to get out of it? Will they get out of it? And just seeing that individualized way of dealing with life. And you will see that when you ask me some more questions about favorite books and things. It is the characters that I'm enamored with a lot of times.
Yeah. So you, as long as there are interesting characters, you're okay that there isn't a whole lot of plot. I'm thinking of The Night Circus, because there is not a whole lot of plot in that book. No. There's a lot of atmosphere.
It's just about Isabel and Marco.
Yeah.
We're talking about The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, by the way. But yes, you have to know the two of them to make any sense out of that magical book.
Yeah.
The next question is, if you had to identify one, what would you classify as a favorite book?
All the Light You Cannot See by Anthony Doer.
Yeah. That's a book.
It's luminous.
Yes.
It's beautiful. It's unforgettable. Heroine, Marie Laure.
Yeah.
You don't forget her. You don't forget Werner, who is kind of her counterpart on the other side of the war.
Yeah.
Just a beautiful, beautiful book about human endurance in spite of incredible odds, incredible trouble. You just don't forget it. No. It's worth a reread.
Yeah. And it's beautifully written.
Yes.
It checks all your boxes.
Yes.
It's a book to savor instead of power read.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to sit in it. And
even though you can power read it because the chapters are so short, you just keep thinking, oh, just one more chapter. Just one more chapter. Just one.
But you have to sit in the story versus read it and get it done.
It's not a thriller. No. Do you have a book, Mom, that you've recently recommended to someone else?
Yes, an Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Emily Wilde. Just a delightful romp through fairyland.
Yeah, it's great.
Magical realism.
Yes.
And I have recommended it to more than a few people. It is a beautiful cover, number one, if you're a person who falls in love with covers. It's unique.
Yeah.
It truly is. It is so original, and just loved it being in the Fae world.
Yeah.
And I know it's not real, but it doesn't matter.
It's very real in the story, though.
Yes.
Yes. I'm listening to it right now, and I have laughed out loud.
Yes.
I can't listen to it while I'm driving. It's not safe.
And there's more to come, folks, if that interests you. It's going to be a trilogy from what I understand.
Oh, interesting.
So,
I knew there was at least another book coming. Okay. Yeah. Again, that's pretty much character studies with character growth and very fun.
Okay. The next one is, do you have a least favorite book?
I do. I'm sure there's others, but the first one that came to my mind was Under the Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. And I found it to be just a huge disappointment and confusing to me altogether. And after the night circus, which I am in love with, it was just a downer.
Yeah.
But I did finish it. I struggled through all that thing about honey and bees.
It was weird.
Yeah, a very, very strange book to me. But anyway, Under the Starless Sea.
I think the idea of that book, of this hidden underground library place, I would go there instantly.
That was great.
100%.
Yes.
Afterwards, it turned a little Neil Gaiman on me.
And you don't like Neil Gaiman?
Sometimes for me, his stories feel disjointed and not connected.
Yeah,
and I think
a little strange.
The end of Starless Sea was getting that way.
Yeah. Mom, do you have a book that you dislike that everyone else seems to love?
Yes. Gone Girl by Gillian
Flynn. Yeah.
Enough said.
I can't even believe you read that book. Every time you say that, I'm just gobsmacked.
There again, it's your fear of missing out. Everybody's talking about Gone Girl. In fact, now all I'm hearing is, when will another book like Gone Girl come out by this particular author? Well, I won't really care much about that, I don't think. This was a book where I just disliked every single character and I couldn't stay with it. I didn't care how it turned out.
Right.
So that's a situation where you won't have FOMO?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Those books, all of her books are interesting to me because I feel like I need to take a shower afterward. They just are so ick.
Yeah.
And yet they're compulsively readable. Like for me, you get started and I didn't care about the characters, but I had to know how they ended. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too for me with thrillers. I don't like the characters, but then I get stuck in the story.
Yeah.
And I'm irritated the whole time I'm reading it. Who would you identify as a favorite author?
I'm going to say Frederick Bachman. I've read just about all of his books. Now, this is the gentleman who wrote A Man Called
Ova,
which is now, of course, a major motion picture with Tom Hanks. That's a book you don't forget quickly. But Frederick Bachman has this unique ability to talk about interpersonal relationships in a way I don't think male authors always do quite as well. Now, you can disagree with me. It's a great perception into family relationships, marriage, how people feel about their children. And, of course, he does great character studies, like the Britt Marie books.
Yeah.
Who is a character in his two of his books. Britt Marie was here, and then my grandmother told me to tell you she's sorry.
Yeah.
And a little bit of magical realism in that. But of course, his series on Beartown, which is about a hockey sports town in Norway.
Some Scandinavian country.
They are incredibly realistic and character development, plot development. You cannot put them down once you start reading them. I just think he's a fabulous author. Next to Maggie O'Farrell right now, he's probably one of my favorites.
Okay. What are you currently reading, Mom?
I'm currently reading Maureen by Rachel Joyce. Actually, I just finished it, so I will stay with that. And that, of course, is the third book in the Harold Fry trilogy. And Maureen is Harold Fry's wife, who endured his travels all over the place to find Queenie, a woman he had worked with years before. You can imagine what that does to a marriage. But this is a very short, almost novella.
Okay.
And it is character from front to back. You know Maureen inside out, and you see her almost as a late middle-aged woman coming of age, understanding herself. And it is there's part of it that's quite sad, quite teary.
Yeah.
But it was good. Good. So if the next question is, do I think I will like it? Yes, I did. I gave it 5 stars.
Good. Well, that's
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Are you a once and done reader, Mom, or do you like to reread books?
I'm a once and done reader, but I have noticed as I grow older, I have a yearning to reread books. So I'm right now rereading, by audio, The Night Circus. Mm. But I am thinking of some others that I want to read again.
Mm-hmm. Is there a book that you reread often?
Little Women. I think I've read it 5 or 6 times. My first time I might have been 8 or 9. Mm-hmm. And there's just everything about that appeals to me. A family of daughters, sisters. Mm-hmm. Sisterhood is a big theme in Little Women. The relationship between mothers and daughters. There's sadness, there's tragedy, there's laughter, there's romance, and it's just all done in a way that you can't stop reading it. It blesses your heart. Mm-hmm. And so it's a great read. It brings back childhood memories. The protagonist, of course, is Jo March, who, to my mind, Louisa May Alcott, she's writing about herself and her own family. Yeah. But her name was Jo March, and my name was Jo, and I didn't know anybody else in the whole world whose name was Jo. So I loved her, and I wanted to be her. And I still do when I read Little Women. Yeah. So, yes, and I intend to reread it. I have it on my shelf to do again.
Do you consider listening to audiobooks reading, Mom? I'm assuming that you do because you just said you're listening to The Night Circus.
If you would have asked me this last year, I would have said no, I don't. But I have recently been introduced to audiobooks because of Stephany mostly. I also found this great platform, Libby, where you can get free audiobooks from your library. And so, yes, I am enjoying it. I like to listen to nonfiction more than fiction. But, yeah, I consider that reading. Yeah. And besides that, it's a good way to read 2 books at one time.
Yeah, that's why I do it. It allows me to do 2 books instead of just one.
Okay, so for the next couple of questions, we're doing rapid fire. The first one is, in general, do you prefer fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction.
Hardback or paperback?
Hardback.
Do you buy or borrow?
Well, I buy because I use an e-reader a lot. So you usually have to buy your books if you want to keep them. So I'm going to say buy. But I do use the library a lot.
Bookmarks or dog ears?
Bookmarks for sure. I don't think we should dog ear our books.
Oh, don't look at my...
That's all right. I think... I have to say, I write all over my Bible and do a lot of marks and dog-earing and stuff. But other than that, I'm not much of a defacer of books.
But the Bible's different. Like, that makes sense in that context.
Yeah. I was just going to say, don't look at my marriage portrait because I had dog-eared it all up.
Well, I don't own a lot of books because I don't have a place to put them, which might be why I don't ever dog ear or write in a book because a lot of times they're not mine.
Yeah.
Finish or DNF?
I like to finish, but I am much braver these days about setting a book aside that is not meeting my readers' needs.
Listeners, if you hear barking in the background, Mom has an adorable little mini golden doodle, and she's just a tad barky, and so you're going to probably hear her occasionally.
She's very verbal. Her daddy is trying to keep her quiet, but it doesn't always happen.
Well, he's outside right now, and she is not, so I think that might be a problem. Okay, Mom, back to the questions. This is the final question, and this is going to get us into our book discussion. Why did you pick The Marriage Portrait for our discussion today?
Well, first off, for me, Maggie O'Farrell as an author never disappoints. No matter what she is writing about, she seems to be particularly adept at historical fiction and building a story around a little-known incident and just drawing you in where you live there. Her writing is so good that you live in the setting. You wear the clothes the people are wearing. You experience their emotions. You yearn over them, and you can't forget them. It's just a book that has stayed with me for a very long time. I read it late last year. there's a woman in this book, and we'll talk about it later, who although she's been immortalized in a piece of poetry and a portrait, her life is sad. And she's been overshadowed in many ways, to my mind, neglected, emotionally abused. And yet her courage and what happens to her through this novel is just incredible. I say probably because Lucretia just will live in my heart for a long time. And I just won't ever be able to think about that period of time and how women lived or didn't live, however you want to look at it. And what may have happened had people like Lucretia been allowed to bloom and grow in all their talents, how the world may have been different even today.
Yeah.
And I remember too, Nana, as we were talking about the book that you wanted us to talk about, I just remember you saying, I need to talk about this with somebody.
Yes, I absolutely do. We need to kick around some of the things that made this young woman what she is.
Well, that definitely is a great segue. So I'll do a little synopsis, and then I'll break down the call pile. So the marriage portrait is about Lucrezia de' Medici, who is the child of Cosimo I, the Grand Duke of Tuscany. So these are real people that actually lived. You can look on Wikipedia and Google and find out all about them. And Lucrezia de' Medici marries Alfonso d'Este II, and the marriage portrait is kind of the story of Lucrezia growing up, marrying Alfonso, and then what that looks like. And we know that Lucrezia dies at 16. There's rumors that she was poisoned or she just got really sick. And so Maggie O'Farrell is, in a sense, it's a thought experiment of what Lucrezia's life could have been like. I will give some historical context for this book from my personal experience, as I was in Italy in the summer of 2018. I think it was.
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
And I didn't realize that all of my history with Italy tied into this book until I started reading it. It was a really cool personal connection. Firstly, there's a show, we can no longer access it on American Netflix, but it's a show about the Borgias. And Rodrigo Borgia is Pope Alexander VI, the first historical pinpoint there. I bring this up because Lucrezia Borgia, who is a controversial figure, is the grandmother of Alfonso d'Este, which is interesting because Lucrezia Borgia marries Alfonso d'Este and Lucrezia de' Medici marries Alfonso d'Este.
Okay.
Secondly, so I was watching that show while I was in Rome, and I got to see the Vatican apartments. The Borgia apartments in the Vatican, and see the painting of Lucrezia. But then I toured the Uffizi Art Museum in Florence, which is in Pitti Palace. And Pitti Palace, which we see in the author's note in the marriage portrait, is where Lucrezia de' Medici grew up and lived until she moved to Ferrara with Alfonso. And in this museum, there is a room that they have kind of sectioned off where you can see original statues and paintings and frescoes, which would have been set up much like how Pitti Palace would have been used at the time of Cosimo I when he was Grand Duke. So lots of cool history.
Yeah, that is a lot of cool background history.
Yeah, and so it was really fun for me to read this. I was like, oh, I know all these things. So I wanted to kind of give some context there for listeners then too. The call pile, which we're going to use as structure for this discussion, will have kind of more information about it in our show notes.
Right. I'll add the link to the actual video of the young lady who created the call pile system.
It is essentially an acronym, and each of the letters stands for a different literary idea that we're going to talk about. So characters, atmosphere, writing, plot, intrigue or interest, logic or relationships, and then overall enjoyment. And so that's how we're going to kind of pinpoint and work through our conversation today.
Yeah. We are not doing the rating system, though, today.
I mean, we will talk about our own personal ratings of the story, but we're not doing the structure.
The math. No math this morning.
I'm
no math on a Saturday morning.
No. Well, then we can just go ahead and jump right into the characters. I will just kind of give a rundown on who the characters are, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So
the main characters.
Yeah. Our primary characters are Lucrezia de Medici and Alfonso d'Este, as that's kind of this couple that we see. And Lucrezia, the story is told through her perspective. Our secondary characters include her parents, Eleonora and Cosimo. Sophia, who is her nursemaid, her
nurse.
governess.
Yeah.
Amelia, who is Lucrezia's maidservant, kind of moves with her from when she is getting married through to the end of her life. Leonello Baldassare is consigliere of Alfonso, which we then meet after they get married. Her sister-in-laws, and then Jacopo, who is an apprentice for a painter.
Yeah.
That we see then as well. And then there's this tiger that moves in and out of the story as well.
Yes.
Nana, how would you like to begin this conversation of the characters?
Well, the book certainly is a character study of Lucrezia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's start with her.
Okay.
This young girl who we first meet at the Forteza, where her husband has taken her without a lady-in-waiting or anyone to attend her. And she has been married just a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. So we first meet her there, but this is a dual timeline. You switch quickly back to when she was born. Mm-hmm. Here's a little baby, difficult child. Her mother thinks it's because that when she was conceived, she didn't have her mind on what she was doing at the time, but she was planning a development along the river that she had found on a map.
Yeah, looking at maps and
had her mind occupied elsewhere. So she did not have a child that was docile and compliant. Very difficult baby, so difficult that they sent her down to the kitchen to be nursed by and cared for people in the kitchen. But as she grows, we find this young lady with a whip smart intelligence and perception about human beings that just blows you away. How she can look at a room and she knows who is in power. She knows who's dangerous. She knows who's in relationship with who. It just seems to be this innate ability. She listens at walls. She listens at doors. So she knows everything that's going on in the castle, despite being a middle child, not well liked by her brothers and sisters, mostly overlooked and ignored by her father, although her mother does try. She tries. And the young lady who discovers she has this artistic talent that probably is equal to any master of the day.
Yeah.
Accidentally discovered. So we'll start out with that.
Sure. And I had forgotten to mention this. Lucrezia marries Alfonso when she's contractually 13.
13, yeah.
Physically when she's 15. Right-ish.
That's one thing that Maggie O'Farrell changes a little bit. She does she gets married and leaves right away in this story. And that's not how it plays out in real life. She lives with her parents for 2 or 3 years before she actually goes and moves in with Alfonso.
Yes.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think watching Lucrezia as she's getting older and how she rises to the challenge of being married to a man who was not picked for her initially, and how she is navigating this while also being a very headstrong woman who loves people and wants to love people, but is really confined to the status that she has to be set in. And then also seeing the example of her parents, who her father wants the opinions of her mother and kind of works together as an equal, but then she's in this marriage now where he wants her to be docile and ignorant. And,
obedient. Yeah. I think Lucrezia she's headstrong. She's very intelligent. She's also, I think because she's so smart and she just often feels overwhelmed by all the information she's gathering all the time. And I struggled with her a little bit, at least when she was younger, just because she seemed so, I don't want to say needy, but she wanted people to see her. And she was constantly doing things, even against her own better judgment. She couldn't help herself. Like, she had poor impulse control. Mm-hmm. And that was annoying to me because I was watching her make bad decisions sometimes. Mm-hmm. But I just think it was part of her personality, mm-hmm. who she was mm-hmm. as an individual. She was very intelligent, and nobody mm-hmm. noticed or cared except her nurse. I think her nurse really had a very good concept of who she was.
And I think the other thing, too, that we see throughout is that Lucrezia was always very comfortable with herself. She was not easily swayed by the opinions of mm-hmm. others.
Right.
Even in the stories, in the sections when she's younger regarding her love of walking around the Fortezza at night, or the tiger, mm-hmm. or the assurance that she has of her answers in the classroom. She's very aware of who she is and very comfortable with that, mm-hmm. and very confident. And I think that that's maybe where some of her tension comes from, mm-hmm. is that she's loves who she is and does not want to be molded into anything else.
Well, I think it's what gave her the confidence to go to her father in front of everybody and say, mm-hmm. I do not want to marry Alfonso. Please don't make me marry him. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that was like a normal thing that you did at that time period. So, mm-hmm. yeah, she was very bold. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why she identified so much with the tiger. So we might as well talk about the tiger because the tiger is like her mirror image. Yeah, her spirit animal. Exactly.
Well, I have just a passage here from the first time she saw the tiger. Now, in case you're wondering, where does the tiger come from? Her father was shown a picture of a tiger one day, and he already had a menagerie way down in his basement, which is described in such detail that I could smell the animals. He had this menagerie. He just had to have a tiger added to it. So he gave the order, and of course, sometime down the line, the tiger was on the way. Lucrezia knew about it because she listened at the doors all the time. And it got into her head that she absolutely had to see this tiger. Now, the children weren't really included in the decision and may have seen the tiger at some point, but she had to see the tiger. So she knew when he was coming. She knew when the tiger would be brought into the courtyard and then taken down to the menagerie. So she made sure that she had gotten out of bed and creeped along wherever she crept along in the castle to keep herself out of sight. I'm just going to read the passage where she first sees the tiger. And then Lucrezia, hands gripping the windowsill, saw it. A lithe, sinuous shape, moving from one side of the cage to the other. The tigress didn't so much pace as pour herself, as if her very essence was molten, simmering like the ooze from a volcano. It was hard to distinguish the bars of the cage from the dark repeating stripes on the creature's fur. The animal was orange, burnished gold, fire-made flesh. She was power and anger. She was vicious and exquisite. She carried on her body the barred marks of a prison, as if she had been branded for exactly this, as if captivity had been her destiny all along.
The American cover of this book has tiger stripes superimposed on the portrait, the true portrait of Lucrezia de Medici. And that, I think, says a lot about what is inside the book, that there's going to be a connection between the two. And I think Lucrezia saw herself as a caged tiger, as somebody who had all this stuff, this potential to give to the world, and from the beginning has been unable to be who she really was because of the constrictions placed on her by the culture, by her parents, and then by her husband, Alfonso. Yeah.
And I think also she thought that fierceness, like she just kind of related with this sense of fierceness. There's a passage in the book when she's in the nursery with her siblings, And she's thinking about the tiger and how the tiger conquered wherever it lived and starts growling, subconsciously. But she's imagining that she's prowling around like this tiger. And then it comes back in other parts of the story where she's leaning into that courage, that fierceness, that bravery.
That identification. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a passage I can quick read. This happens after she's married and her sweet maid Amelia is with her. They're in the Delizia and they're going into a dark room. There's no light and they're both afraid because it's scary. And it says she lifts her chin, seizes the candle from Amelia and thrusts it out at arm's length. She is not afraid. No, she is not. A beast, muscled and brave, lives within her. She tells herself this over the cantering of her heart. Let the ghouls that hover in the corners of the room see what they are dealing with. She is the 5th child of the ruler of Tuscany. She has touched the fur of a tigress. She has scaled a mountain range to be here. Take that, darkness. So yes, she absolutely identifies with the fierceness of the tiger. And then I just want to say one more thing about the tiger. It's killed in the menagerie because people are careless and leave the connection open between the 2 lions and the tiger. And there's this terrible fight and the 2 lions ultimately kill the tiger. And that imagery comes back into play at the end of the story, not with the animals, but with real people. So maybe we can talk about Alfonso and Leonello now.
Because we could talk about Lucretia forever.
Right,
There's just so much, but maybe more will come out as we talk about the plot and different intrigues and things that happen.
Alfonso, definitely. The way that I think Maggie O'Farrell crafts him is that from the beginning, you want, at least for me, I was automatically pulled into the fact that, he's sweet, he's thoughtful, he's romantic. For the engagement gift, instead of sending jewels, which was customary, he sent a painting of an animal. And she loved that. And then during the early marriage at the Delizia, you think, he's so sweet. This is going to be great. Not a care in the world. But then I think Maggie O'Farrell does a fabulous job of inserting little scenes and little glances and little phrases where you start to wonder, maybe this isn't good anymore. And for me, I began to question, is Alfonso truly a man of power and trying to establish his court, or is he truly an abusive, manipulative man? Like, what is context and versus character? And up until the very end, I went back and forth of, should I like this guy or should I not? Is he good? Isn't he? And I think that made it an engaging story because I didn't know what part of Alfonso we were going to see next.
Right. It definitely created the tension that she needed to move the story along. I felt like Alfonso was an enigma because you're right. In the beginning, he just really seemed to know. He seemed to know Lucrezia, what would actually make her happy. Like, he also knew what he should do as a ruler of they weren't countries, they were dukedoms or whatever. I'm not even sure what they called them. But he knew what was appropriate to give jewels and things like that. But the personal gifts that he gave Lucrezia were very true to who she was. So you got this sense that he knew her. Like, he took the time to figure out who she was. But you just kept questioning it. Like, is it just he's manipulating her? He's using his knowledge to make sure that she behaves in a way that he needs her to have control. I don't know. What do you think, Mom?
I think he was handsome. If I'm reading the description of him, tall with very dark hair and
big shoulders. I think she said that a couple times.
I think that appealed to this dear little 13-year-old girl, even though she had no idea what it meant to be married or what it meant to be a consort, of a duke. He is an enigma. I cannot really bring together that description of him who knew she would love the painting of a mouse because the first time he met her, she was holding a little mouse in her hand. How he knew that, it's just so hard to bring that together. That man who so protected her and tenderly found out ways to please her is the same man who, down the line, his sister told Lucretia, "You have no idea what he is capable of."
And you see that. You see that in the story when he has her lover strangled.
Yes.
Sister's lover.
Sister's lover.
The sister's lover strangled, and just how he starts to treat Lucrezia at the end, and just some of the ways people interact with him. They're fearful of him, which definitely, and I think of another instance too, where his consigliere, is that how you say that?
Consigliere.
Consigliere.
GLI is like a E.
Okay. Pretty much beats the heck out of a little boy who tripped and spilled something, and Alfonso allows it to happen.
And then berates Lucrezia
for telling her to stop. Yeah. So just, she uses all these little vignettes to help you build a picture of a man who, you're right, is he doing it because it's expected of him because he's a man of power? Or is he doing it because he's manipulative and cruel? And I'm thinking it was all of that.
Well, and I think something else too is he is significantly older than her. Early 30s. And he needs to produce an heir. And I think also as their marriage goes on and that's not happening, that he starts to get more anxious. And I think maybe that's having a play in this too, because his family is under immense pressure because his mother and his sisters are Protestants. And so then there's pressure from the Pope on the family as well. So I think it's also, not defending his actions, but I think it's also a situation of that building pressure of needing to hit certain obligations and do certain duties, and it's not happening. The other thing that I think we're kind of dancing around, and we just might need to say it, is the book starts off with, in the first page, Lucrezia identifying the fact that Alfonso is trying to kill her.
Yes, she recognizes it.
In the first paragraph.
Right off the bat.
You know exactly where the book is heading. Well, I take that back. You think you know exactly where the book is heading, but the whole story is doing that. It's building up to support that.
Right. The other thing that I think maybe is worth mentioning is that Alfonso was initially engaged to Lucrezia's older sister. Was it Isabella? Maria. And then she dies.
Yes.
And then he gets passed to Lucrezia. And so there can be some question of whether, did he purposefully pick Lucrezia because she was younger and seemed more malleable? And then I think also, again, a historical fact here, Alfonso goes on to have 2 other wives and is unable to produce an heir in any of them.
Right. And it's suggested in the book that even he's had lovers and
there's been no children.
Yeah. And everybody seems to know he can't have kids, and yet Lucrezia bears the burden of that.
Yeah.
Leonello Baldassare, is that how you say his? Is Alfonso's right-hand man. And there are a couple of things about him that really stand out to me. Number one, he almost seems like a sociopath to me, or a psychopath, in that he's very flat. He doesn't seem to carry any emotion. He has no trouble being cruel to people. I think he's very loyal to Alfonso. And I also think that he's whispering in his ear all the time. And he's not shown in a good light ever. There's never a time where he's shown in a good light. From the minute that he's introduced to Lucrezia until the very end, I almost feel like he is the puppeteer pulling the strings of what Alfonso is doing a lot of the time.
Well, and that, again, not defending actions, but historically, if he's the advisor, I think most advisors at the time took on this role of being unemotional, very cold to me, because trying to orchestrate how to build whatever domain they're trying to build. I think Leonello definitely takes on this dark, ominous cloud. And so again, it's a question of historically contextual or truly an evil person. The other thing for me with Leonello is Well, there's two, but the scene where Leonello does kind of pretty awfully beat the young servant boy, I remember the writing automatically, you could feel the atmosphere go cold, like just instantly. And I think at that moment, if there was any question about who Leonello was, there
wasn't
no
anymore.
doubt. Yeah.
No, especially after Lucrezia yelled, like emotionally just yelled out. He made sure to bang the child's head on the board one more time. Yeah. And right there, I thought, I know exactly what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
You have anything you want to add, Mom?
Well, for this Leonello, he was in the book, but there's really very few scenes where he is present.
No.
Every single one is infused with this dread. Every single encounter he has with Lucrezia, and then we're talking about the one where he beat the young boy. You don't see him that often or hear from him that often. And yet every time you get this really chilly, creeping sense of dread is just my best way of saying it. The description of him, he's a beautiful man.
Yeah. Lots of
Beautiful
gold,
man,
wavy
golden
hair.
and he's well built and all of that. There is some indication at one point, one of Alfonso's sisters said, you took his place to Lucrezia. That you can do the one thing that he cannot do. He cannot bear an heir.
Well, and he couldn't have been the Duke's consort ever in that setting. Yeah.
No.
So interesting. We could conjecture about their true relationship.
Yeah.
Leonello and Alfonso. I won't, because it would be adding something that I just may have suspected. But yes, the man, it just, every inch of him is just this evil darkness.
It feels like it. It certainly
And
does.
It's like seeps out.
Yeah.
It creeps into every scene that he's in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful plot technique.
Yeah.
To have that happening, because he does figure prominently in the ending.
Yeah, he does.
Well, and I think too, he takes on the role of the perfect foil to Lucrezia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Because she is this young woman full of life and vibrant, and this tiger.
Yeah.
And then Leonello, the scene where he has rabbits strapped to his horse and sucks all the air out of everything and just has this darkness.
And even his name, Leonello. So he's the lion.
He's the lion.
Yeah.
Perfect.
To her tiger. But it's interesting because she is, I don't want to say she's not afraid of him, but she knows him. She has no misgivings about who he is, what he's capable of. She knows exactly, and she won't be bullied by him.
Yeah.
And I think that makes him mad. So two other characters we just want to touch on briefly, just so we have a full picture of what's going on here, are Lucrezia's maid, Amelia, who is a few years older than Lucrezia and was the daughter of her milk nurse in the kitchen, wet nurse in the kitchen, Lucrezia's wet nurse. So Amelia has known her since she was a baby. And she follows her to Ferrara, to Alfonso's court, and takes care of Lucrezia. The thing that's very important in this relationship, and while I'm bringing it up, is they look very similar. Same color hair, same height, same general look. They look like they could be sisters.
Yeah. Except Amelia has a long scar.
Right, and her hair isn't quite as red as Lucrezia's.
Yeah.
And then Jacopo. Does anybody want to talk about Jacopo? I don't want to take the conversation away.
Well, he's an ancillary character, you think.
Yes.
You think. He is a painter's apprentice. And the gentleman who is going to paint Lucrezia's marriage portrait, which, by the way, was a custom of the times.
Yes.
You got married, your husband had a portrait painted to hang in a prominent place in the house. So the painter comes, and he has apprentices who, in this case, it's indicated that the apprentices were the real painters. But Jacopo is one of these young men. And Lucrezia first meets him when he's in a diabetic coma. And she finds him lying in the hall and does, by giving him honey. How she knew this,
She said she saw somebody do it when she was younger.
And she does bring him out of the coma. And so they have this connection in a way that I think you often do if somebody saves your life. And so you think he's kind of an ancillary character, although if that were the only incident with him, you'd wonder why it was in the book. But an interesting side note with him, they think he's mute. Everybody thinks he's mute, but he's not. He speaks a dialect that's not familiar to the area. And interestingly enough, Lucretia's nurse, Sophia, also spoke that dialect. And Lucretia, being so bright, actually figured that language out. So she listened to the servants talking all the time, which is how she got a lot of information. It turns out that just incidentally, she hears Yakupov speak in that dialect, and they speak. Okay, that is just in one scene. It's very brief. He drops something that he's working with, and when he kneels down to pick it up, he speaks in that dialect, and they have this quick, oh, do you speak this? Yes, I do, And later on, when they come to deliver the portrait at the Fortezza, it's the first time Alfonso calls her his last duchess in that scene. He doesn't say my duchess. He said, oh, it's my last duchess, which everybody picks up on and wonders about. But Yakupov really did. And he lets Lucretia know she is in danger. And he also provides a way for her to avoid the danger. So he's not developed in a way that a lot of the other characters do. So he is really an enigma to me.
Yeah.
But he's so important to the plot.
Yeah.
So important. So there you have it. There's the cast of characters.
Right. It's a pretty big one. And we didn't even touch on the sisters. But yeah, there are a lot of characters, and a lot of them play an important role in what happens.
Yeah. Well, then let's jump to atmosphere a little bit. As kind of mentioned, this is Italy in the late 1500s, kind of, the middle of that century.
This is the Renaissance time period.
Yes. And it is in Tuscany. She grows up in Tuscany in Florence and then moves to Ferrara, which is the northern part of Italy, in a Fortezza and then a Palazzo. And then at the very end, the Delizia is where kind of they honeymoon at, essentially. So that's the physical place and time and atmosphere. Nana, when you're thinking of the atmosphere for this, how would you talk about it?
Well, we're talking about people who are incredibly wealthy, privileged. It's an atmosphere where the men are powerful and, of course, direct the lives of everyone around them. The women are very secluded, still enjoy the privileges of great wealth. They're taken care of by ladies in waiting, and it's the palace. It's the whole palace setting. But I will just say the atmosphere, and a good word for it, I can't think of any other way to say it, it's Hitchcockian. You have all of this going on. Each page, each layer brings out one more of this expectation of nothing good is going to happen here. And, Alfred Hitchcock's a master of that, the layers of suspense. Oh, it's going to happen now. Oh, it didn't. Now it's going to happen. You're always doing this with Alfred Hitchcock. And that is this book.
Yeah.
That would be the atmosphere. Understanding it's the dual timeline. The actual time from first page to last page, time elapse is only a couple days. Is it 36 hours maybe, or 48?
Very short.
It's very short. It might just be 2 days.
In between, of course, is years of Lucretia's childhood and the first years of her marriage. But you're actually just talking about the last couple days of what we believe will be Lucretia's life.
Right. Right. And for me, I went into this book after reading 1,200 pages of The Count of Monte Cristo. And that was an uneven reading experience for me, to say the least. And it took me 3 weeks. So I picked up this book because I wanted to read it and start preparing for this discussion. And I probably wasn't in the right frame of mind. And I knew Lucrezia was a true person. I knew she died when she was 16. So I started reading this book, and of course, the very first page, it's all doom and gloom. I know my husband is trying to kill me. And I felt like that whole book just kept ratcheting up the doom and gloom, even though you're getting these wonderful glimpses into who she was as a child. And her whole life was not miserable. I mean, she was well taken care of. Her family was wealthy. She loved art, and she was given art lessons by masters. She had, whether she recognized it or not, she had a very protected, pampered life. But this thing is hanging over you the whole time. She's going to die. I'm reading this whole book. I'm caring about this character, and she's going to die. And that was for me, the whole atmosphere. It was always in the background. But in the foreground, I think Maggie O'Farrell did a great job of building what life was like in the 1500s, just generally. And I loved the Delitzia, especially the descriptions and the landscape and all of that. You knew what the food tasted like, and you knew what the entertainment was like and what people were wearing. And yeah. It was just, I really enjoyed that Italian Renaissance atmosphere, and she did a really good job of building that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm such a sucker for Italian Renaissance history books. But I also think when you look at all of these different places that she lived, so the Palazzo, and then the Delizia, and then not the Fortezza, but where she was with
the palace, or whatever they called it. Yeah.
And then into the Fortezza. Each of these 4 different places has a very distinct atmosphere feeling to it. Yeah. The Palazzo, it's confined, but in a different way. It's
a comforting, like you don't get the impression there's any danger. It's just normal everyday life.
Childhood, kind of, right. And then the Delizia feels bright and airy and happy and honeymoony. And then when she moves into the palace, I forget what the actual word is that they're using, it feels more mature. Almost. Like she has to assume this role, but the wording and the language, you begin to realize, okay, I have to set onto my role now. And then the Fortezza is dark and isolated, and I think Maggie O'Farrell does an incredible job of taking these different places in which Lucrezia has to be and creating separate atmospheres in each of them to propel the story along.
Yeah. And they also, I've said this before, that atmosphere kind of matches emotionally what is happening with Lucrezia. So that when you're in the Fortezza, when she's realizing her life is going to end, how dark and heavy and cold it feels and oppressive. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. So what about Maggie O'Farrell's writing? Since we're really actually talking about it anyway.
Yeah, we're there.
What do you think, Mom? You said writing is important to you.
It's lush. It's many layered. She uses a lot of different vignettes, small little happenings to add to her plot. When we were talking about the tiger, that's not the only time Lucre, as her brothers and sisters called her, sensed the idea that she was caged. I recall one time where she was painting a dead bird, and she thought the bird had been trapped. And how did it die? Was it frightened? Were its wings beating against the window pane? And then another time in her class, they're just brief vignettes where they were talking about, and now the people's actual names are going to escape me. They were talking about an event in Grecian history where someone sacrificed his daughter, told her she was going to be married to.
Oh, yes.
Married to.
Agamemnon. It's Agamemnon. Yes. And I forget the name of his daughter. His wife was Clytemnestra.
Yes. And
Clytemnestra.
She just entered into that story and remembered everything about it, and could even feel this girl walking towards her supposed groom, and ended up with her, throat cut and on like an altar. And just those little, it didn't go long, but there was just so often. And then another time she talked about a canary in a cage and how Lucretia thought how the canary won't fly free, can only sing and be who he's supposed to be if he's out of the cage. But they're brief things. And just all those little plot techniques to build on this idea that I am a free bird, but I am not.
Yeah.
And I never will be.
Yeah.
For Lucre. Just those kinds of things. She used, there's not a wasted line in the book.
Yeah, I agree.
If anyone can find one, they need to show it to me. There's nothing wasted, but it is not spare prose at all. It's lush. It has a lot of depth. Everything has meaning. Everything is there for a reason.
She uses a lot of imagery and symbolism and
description,
descriptive terms, metaphors, simile, lots of adjectives, unique adjectives. But I like that kind of writing, so it works for me.
Yeah.
And then that ability to evoke atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with everything that's been said. I think for me, this book felt a lot like a frosty window that you make an impression on, because it's there. It's just, I don't know how else to say it other than it's an impression that's left. And I think the other thing too for the writing for me is how angry I became at the descriptions of the doctors with Lucrezia.
Oh yeah.
And how she had almost no choice in the matter when the doctors were like, you need to be confined now.
We're cutting your hair off.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're cutting your hair. We're going to make you drink this. You can't go outside. Yeah. And I get angry with stuff like that anyway. But the way that the book was done, I was so furious that I can't. It's no wonder women struggled. Yes. I can't imagine being in that situation and needing to comply.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have lasted very long.
I think we need to always watch, as I was warned as I read one review of this book, that we project our own feminist viewpoint in this day and age on a time where women were not feminist, probably had no idea how to be one, maybe had those stirrings. Like we know that Lucre here, she knew she was caged. She knew it, but maybe didn't have a way to say, this is what my life would be.
Or any way to make it change. She had no power to change anything about what was happening, unless she ran away. But even then, she's a woman. What was she gonna do? Yeah.
So we need to be careful. We're not putting our modern viewpoint on this, because it appears to me, from what I'm reading, especially for women of wealth, power, the nobility, they knew that their role was to make a marriage that produced heirs, number one, but also gave their family, some political and economic advantage. So they knew that was their role and that they should fulfill that. So I'm just being careful there. But at the same time, we're talking about a novel, and we're talking about an author who may write whatever she pleases about that period of time and about the person in it. And don't we in our hearts want to know that Lucretia wanted something different?
I understand what the person was saying about being careful that we don't overlay our modern sensibilities on historical settings. I understand that. But that it's still fine to say how this person was treated is not okay, because I'm hoping our modern sensibilities recognize oppression, discrimination, unequal power in a situation.
Well, and just because something was doesn't mean it should have been.
Right.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, I'm going to go back to this, what this world even today may have been had women been unencumbered by some of these societal and even religious, I'm going to say it, even religious boundaries that were just laid upon them by no choice of their own.
Yeah.
I often wonder what this world would be
Yeah.
to have had their beauty, their interpretation of the world, their intelligence, all that they had to bring to this world if it would have been allowed to flourish.
Well, and I was thinking about this earlier. Just in general, they were so educated then. Like, am I smart in comparison? Just being able to speak so many languages and know so much. And it's just a general side note. I want to be that smart. So maybe it's a bright spot or not, but she was definitely very smart and knew. Even though she was aware of the situation that she was in, she knew how to paint, and she loved to paint, and she knew how to do what she needed to do and to solve problems and rise to the conversations with Leonello, and she knew how to handle herself within all of that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the plot. We've definitely talked a lot about it already, I think.
Yeah. Maybe just a concise description of what's happening is best here.
Sure. I think the main plot of the story is Lucrezia going to die or not at the end? I think, to put that really simply. I think
Yeah.
No other way to put it.
Right. The whole book is we are heading to this single point, Lucrezia's death. But we get there just following her life experiences. And then interwoven with that is this very short period of time, the 2 days prior to what would be her death.
And I might have failed to mention this at the beginning. Lucrezia does die. It's reported as putrid fever, which is the catch-all for just about everything, with the rumors of being poisoned. So Maggie O'Farrell definitely has tons of room to operate within for the ending of the story.
So does Lucrezia die?
Lucrezia does not die, and I think we need to say that because we've been dancing around it from the beginning. She does not die, and this is where Jacopo comes in.
He comes back.
Because he intuits and understands completely that she is in grave danger. Now, I need to say this. Alfonso does poison her
Yes.
in those first couple pages, and she becomes violently ill and almost dies. It is only because her lady-in-waiting, Amelia, shows up and rescues her. So he has already tried once to kill her. And there is a very interesting scene where they bring the new marriage portrait in to unveil it. And Alfonso and Baudelaire believe she's dead because they poisoned her. I don't know who did it. And she gets dressed and walks down to the unveiling of that portrait. And you can see the setting of that room and how those men must have
been like, oh my gosh.
We've got big problems on our hands. But Yakupov, who has sensed this real connection with Lucrezia because she saved his life, he provides a way out for her. He makes sure the locks on the back door to the servants' entrance do not lock that night, and he tells her about it. She, sensing the danger that she's in that evening, puts on her maid's clothing. And here's where it's very important to remember she and her maid are very similar in appearance, and her maid is sleeping in her bed. And Lucrezia dresses in Amelia's clothing, goes down and gets some food from the kitchen.
Because she's hungry. She had no intention of escaping. She was just going to get food because she was hungry.
And she was wearing Amelia's clothing because she was going to go unnoticed and she didn't want to draw attention.
She did have a little interesting almost encounter with Baudelaire on that nighttime wandering, which I thought, now it's going to happen, something terrible. But it didn't. And again, there's that Hitchcockian vibe coming on. The suspense is really something else then. She gathers her food and goes to leave, and then she thinks, could that lock have been disabled? Like, would that ever have happened in this castle when Alfonso is so careful and
all the guards and she
tries it, and the first time nothing happens, but she tries it again. The door is unlocked. She steps out to the ledge, takes her a little while to get off the ledge, and she walks into the night.
Runs. She runs into the night.
we don't know anything after that, except in the very last page and a half of the book, somewhere in Italy, these beautiful miniatures are being sold and sought after of animals.
Yeah.
Well, and that ties right back to this idea of Lucrezia trapped, needing to be who she wants to be, because she started to do the technique where she'd paint a scene, realize nobody else should see it, and then would paint over it.
Yeah.
And so in these little miniatures, I believe it says that people are like, is there something under it? Should I take the first layer off? And so I think that comes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Too.
So spoiler.
Yeah. It's it ends up this book just completely gobsmacked me, because like I said, I went into it maybe not with the best attitude, and I was perceiving all doom and gloom when I was reading. And then I got to that ending and I was just like, where did this come from? Like, I was not expecting an alternative history. I thought this was going to be a historical imagining of what happened to Lucre, and I was so happy for her that it actually turned the book around for me. Not that I wasn't enjoying the writing and the reading experience. It's just that I had this dread that she was going to die. I was going to like this character, and I knew she was done for in the end. And she wasn't.
Yeah.
At the same time she's escaping, by the way, Alfonso and Leonello go up the steps and go in the room, and they actually murder Amelia because they think it is Lucrezia sleeping in the bed.
Yeah,
They smother her.
It's a horrible
scene.
horrible description.
It's a horrible description, but it is what happens. It is what happens when someone's smothered. And managed to get away with that murder. They never realized that they didn't kill Lucrezia, because I don't think he ever looked at her after he murdered her, because her purpose for him was done.
And he would have never taken care of the body.
No. So when her father and brother came to claim her, they didn't recognize her either, because she had been so horribly killed.
So for the intrigue or interest part of this conversation, did this story keep your interest?
Well, for me, yes. Even though I said the sense of dread and the trepidation I felt reading this book, because I thought I knew how it ended, Maggie O'Farrell's writing is just so good, and she created such an interesting character in Lucrezia and such an interesting storyline that I was never not interested. I never did not want to pick up the book. I always wanted to pick it up. I always wanted to read more, and I always wanted to get to the end, even though I thought I knew what was happening. So I was intrigued, definitely.
I couldn't stop reading it for many reasons, but I think your interest is built simply because of that step-by-step, that layering of learning about Lucrezia's character, and that step-by-step bringing in all the different aspects of her life that made her who she was, and then that step-by-step layering of the dread of what was going to happen, and then that surprise ending. Great stuff.
Yeah, I think
Yes,
the
I was
intrigue was
intrigued.
high level of intrigue
Yes.
throughout.
I agree.
Okay.
I think the way that the split timeline was done, how do you not
Right.
Yeah.
want to know what's happening? I think having those spliced sections of Lucrezia in the height of the poisoning, and then we're in the Delizia, and then we're back to the poisoning, and then we're right. How do you not want to know what's going on?
Yep.
So much drama in every scene too, whether it's a joyous scene or
Yeah.
For the logic and relationships, I think we've talked a lot about relationships already throughout our conversations. And I want to make a point that I think if Lucrezia had known the fate that was coming to Amelia, I do not think she would have left.
No, I don't think she ever would have sacrificed her maid for her own escape or survival. I do not think she would have done that. And I think it would have broken her heart if she knew that Amelia died in her place.
I think she would have faced down Alfonso and Leonello in her room, even though she knew what the end point would be.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree.
And as far as logic goes, I felt like the story was very logical. There was never a point where I was scratching my head saying, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't fit in with the rest of what I'm reading. I never felt like that.
Yeah. So then overall enjoyment, how did we, what was the rating? Did we enjoy it?
Well, it's hard to enjoy some of it.
Well, yeah.
And mostly because we've said it just so much said we do not want this to happen to this young woman. And we take some issue to how she was treated, how women were treated in general, and this general idea that they're just there to be a baby maker. And that's about it.
Yeah.
Not to be seen. But so it's hard to enjoy that part of it, but setting that aside, yes. It's a great read. It's an enjoyable read for many reasons.
I agree. The ending turned it around for me as far as enjoyment. A lot of the story, I can't really say that I was happy reading it. I was emotionally involved, but it usually had to do with being worried for Lucrezia or angry for her or frustrated with situations and events. But Maggie O'Farrell's writing is just so rich and has so much depth. And even just making the connections with imagery and symbolism was fun and fascinating. So even just in that regard, I enjoyed it. The ending turned it around for me, made it a 5-star. Probably wouldn't have been 5-star without that ending, just because it was kind of a dreadful story up until then. But
and you pointed out that you came out of Count of Monte Cristo,
Right.
which is
I was already kind of,
Yeah.
I wasn't in a good headspace.
Yeah.
Well, and historical fiction can be sometimes very dry, and people want to be factual. And so there is that delightful element that this is not dry.
Yeah.
Factual, I think.
Yeah, as much as it can be.
Right.
Not dry and not, you don't feel like you're reading a textbook.
Right.
What about you, Julia? I know that you skew a little bit differently than Mom and I do.
So I will say, I don't think I would have picked this book up. I haven't read Hamnet yet. So I don't think I would have picked this up until after I had read Hamnet. It would have gone on my TBR list. I would have been like, I want to read this at some point. So I'm very thankful to have read it now. It worked perfectly to, move right into my spring reading. I just finished Birth of Venus by Sarah Dunnett, which is a great compliment to the story. I think this one does it much better, but very similar stories. For me, when I read historical fiction, if it's about a real person at a real time in history, I want it to be historically sound. I don't want real things to be messed with. And so the ending upset me because of that, because we know that she dies. Right. That being said, because there's question around her death.
Right.
It's okay. I can be upset, but it's fine. And through our conversations of some of the themes and some of the tiger, it's not that I missed it. I just wasn't paying attention to it. Or the tiger and the lion and then Leonello. And I had missed all of that the first time through because I just wasn't paying attention to it. So
you were just reading the story.
Right.
Yeah.
And so through our conversations, I think I have enjoyed it a lot more because of being able to see the layers of things that I missed because I just enjoyed the story.
Right. And that's the fun part about talking about books with people, because it helps you to see things that you didn't on your own. And I had no idea about the history that you shared. That doesn't really have to do with what's in the book specifically, but it certainly gives it context. So, yeah. The other thing I can say about enjoyment is if a book can send me down several rabbit holes doing internet searches for images and histories of the characters I'm reading about, that usually indicates it's a good book. And I definitely did this with The Marriage Portrait. And I found it interesting that not only was Lucrezia's death questionable, her older sister's death was questionable, and her brother probably killed his wife as well. So there's a lot of, what is that called when you're killing your wife? Is that matricide? No, what is that? There's just a lot of murder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't matricize when you
Kill your kid. Oh, your mother. Okay.
That might have happened.
There's a lot of wife-icide going on.
Wife-icide.
Okay, well, I think we did a pretty good job of taking the marriage portrait apart. I think we could have spent another 3 hours talking about stuff, but this was a pretty good dive into it. Mom, thank you for joining us today.
You are so welcome. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for picking the marriage portrait. It's a book that I was planning on reading at some point, but I didn't have any specific time that I was going to read it. So this really pushed me, and I'm glad I read it because it was a good book. Our next episode, which drops April 5th, will be our first quarterly review of 2023. And we'll be looking back on January, February, and March, sharing some of the books we've read, not all of them, probably most of our favorites and maybe a couple that didn't work for us. So please, if that interests you, join us in our next chapter. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us today. We'd love for you to join us when we do our quarterly review.
Thanks so much for spending part of your day with us. We'd love for you to continue today's conversation at the @BooksnugPodcast on Instagram and at the Booksnug Podcast on Facebook. All of our episodes can be found wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as at our website, thebooksnugpodcast.buzzsprout.com, where show notes for every episode can be found. We'd love to hear from you, so email us at thebooksnugpodcast@gmail.com.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me." And we wholeheartedly agree.